Hello everyone, my name is Maxim VDW, and today I want to show you my new plugin called ConditionPerms, also called Condition Permissions. ConditionPerms is a plugin that allows you to use my large library of placeholders to create specific conditions and execute commands or give permissions depending on whether these conditions are true or false. And you can also revoke permissions when the condition is no longer met, uh, or execute some different commands when the condition is no longer met. So this is the configuration. It's created on first startup. You have some basic plugin settings you find in any of my plugins, like with the log, update checking, recommended especially for performance updates or placeholder updates. You have some options to log the memory usage of placeholders at the startup. It's about 50 megabytes of memory use. It depends on the amount of plugins you have and the enabled placeholders. Then the condition engine is the engine that will be used to evaluate the placeholders. So I suggest not editing this. Just keep it set to JavaScript. And then we have the database. So the database keeps track who has gotten the permissions or who has gotten the commands. So if, for example, a condition for a specific player is set is true, and he gets some permissions and some commands get executed, they won't get executed again if the server reboots or something. So this just keeps track of who has gotten a condition. Default is set to SQLite, and I suggest keeping it like this because there isn't a large amount of data that's being saved, and it's not queried often, so I suggest just keeping it SQLite. If you do want to use MySQL, there's support for it. The configuration is about the same as the bucket.gml file, so it's also with ebeans. But yeah, I suggest keeping it to SQLite. So now we come to the main part. So these are the conditions. Default, it comes with 3 conditions, a health example, a fly example, and a bed location example. The health example and fly example are a bit the same, so they just execute a command when the condition is met and execute a command when the condition is no longer met. So let's start with condition. So this is the condition. This is the main part of a condition, obviously. So here you can put placeholders, any placeholders you want, and it will evaluate those placeholders. So in this example, we have health, which translates to a number between 0 and 20, where 20 is full health and 10 is your centered health. Well, 5 hearts, just 5 hearts. And what this will do, it will check if the health is lower than 10. So lower than 5 hearts. So 4.5 is lower than 5 hearts. And it will check this every 60 ticks for all players that are online. Sorry, this was just something I was testing. So for all players that are online. And when the condition is met, it will execute the commands on grant, which is just say player has low health, help him. And again, you can put placeholders in this, and they will translate to the placeholder to the placeholders of the player of the condition that is met. Okay, that's. And then you see revoke set to true. This means once the condition is met and you start healing again, and the condition is no longer met, it will execute the commands on revoke. And if you have permissions in the permissions section, it will also revoke those permissions again. So you can give permissions as long as the condition is met, but when it's no longer met, you can just remove them again. And when it's set to false, once the condition is met, you get the permissions, and if it's no longer met, yeah, then nothing happens. You just keep the permissions. Uh, so yeah, then the fly example. This will just check if the player is flying, and it will check this every half a second. And again, just execute a command, player is flying, and player is no longer flying. So I can test this out. Let me check. Okay, so Maxim VDW is no longer flying, and when I start flying again, it will say Maxim VDW is flying. So this was just a very basic example. And then we have another condition called the bed location example. Just a basic example I wanted to show the power of the condition. So as you can see here, the engine was JavaScript, which means you can use JavaScript libraries inside your condition. You can use the med library, you can use the day library, you can use any library you have in JavaScript. And in this case, I just used the med library to get the absolute value of a small simple calculation. And what this will do, it will check if a player, so the XYZ position of a player, is near the 10 blocks of the XYZ position of a bed or the spawn of a player. And it will check this every 20 ticks, so every second. And again, revoke is set to true, so it will revoke permissions when you leave the area of your bed, and grant them again when you enter it. So the commands on grant say player you are close to your bed, and say player no, wrong way. So I'm going to test this first, and then I'm going to add a permission. So my spawn is over there, so it says Maxim VDW or you're close to your bed. And when I leave it again, it will say no, wrong way. And now I'm going to add a permission. So I'm going to add a featherboard. So featherboard group my board. This was just a simple board I created just to have something visual to show you. And when I reload, ConditionPerms reload, and I enter it again, it will show the scoreboard. So you can show a scoreboard depending on a condition. And when I leave it again, it will remove the scoreboard because it revokes the permission. And this was, I just used featherboard as an example because it's something you can see. But imagine creating conditions that do things in the background. Like for example, if you create a condition that checks the quest level, for example, you have like placeholders for quests, and it checks if you reached level 100. And you want to give players the ability to use colors on signs once they reach that level. You can just create a condition if the level is bigger than 100, give permission, whatever permission you need to use colors. I don't know. So yeah, that's some basic example, but there are lots and lots of placeholders you can choose from, and lots of opportunities you can do. You can use this for VIP perks or on RP. I can imagine this being great in RPG servers to give players abilities based on levels or skills or zones they enter. So that's something cool you can do with this. So yeah, if you haven't already, my placeholder page has around 3,000 placeholders, and more are coming every month or every week even. Currently there are 3,020 placeholders. And of course I know there are like some action placeholders like the sound and firework, but you can also use those placeholders in the commands on grant to give a sound when you get a condition. So for example, if I put a sound in the conditions commands on grant, it will the player will hear that sound when a condition is set to true. Sorry, I'm thinking and speaking at the same time. That's not really ideal. Okay, now let's talk about performance. So performance was something I really value in this plugin because you're actually evaluating JavaScript for all players in usually fast intervals. So I suggest you using Java 8, but Java 7 should be fine. And normally the performance should be great. There's also a command you can use, ConditionPerms timings. And here you can see how many milliseconds on average it takes to evaluate the conditions for all players. So usually it should be around 200 milliseconds on for average servers, I guess. And all these actions are done on a separate thread, so not in the main thread. So your TPS shouldn't be affected, but your CPU will use some power. So it will just use some CPU power, but it won't delay the ticks per second in your main thread. So yeah, so as you can see, the ConditionPerms timings, everything says 0 milliseconds. Now this comes because this is the reason because that it says 0 milliseconds is because there are different tiers of performance. So the first tier, the most performant, efficient tier, are the placeholders that are actually made for this plugin, like the placeholders that return true or false. And an example is the isFlying. So things like this shouldn't take any time at all. Well, maybe they do take some time, but they shouldn't take any time at all. They are really fast, so these are the best things to check. Then the second tier of condition performance is are placeholders that don't change often. So it won't evaluate the conditions every time if nothing has changed. So for example, with levels or with numbers that don't change often is good because they are only checked when they change, which in this case, the health example is only evaluated when you heal or when you get damaged. And then the last tier are things like where you use the where you use libraries, where you do calculations, and also where the placeholders change often. So in this case, I haven't moved for a while, so the XYZ position hasn't changed. But when I start moving, when I start moving and I start flying and doing things and well, just doing some random things, and I start moving and I use the timings command, you will see that it took 5 milliseconds, for example, for the bed location example to evaluate for 2 players. This doesn't mean it takes 2.5 milliseconds for every player. This can vary, it's very random, but I just want to point out that the performance shouldn't affect your server in terms of lag or something. Performance is, I care about performance in especially plugins like this, and they are really made to last a long time without causing any lag. And that's actually everything in this plugin. I don't really think there's anything else I could say. Well, I guess if you have any questions, first read the description. Maybe there's more information in the description. But if you have a question, just contact me on Freshdesk. And I hope you like the plugin. See you soon.